project to UNESCO and received the sum of $26,000. And this was to begin the process towards the erection of a monument. And so the first stage of the project was to sensitize, to create awareness, to engage people in discussion and debate. And of course, we all know of the heated debates that took place during that period in 2001. And of course, it was very controversial, and that was good for the project because the objective of the project was achieved. Now, the United Nations declared in 1995 as the Year of Tolerance. Both the WTO and UNESCO expressed their desire to foster economic and human development through cultural tourism. The objective was to rehabilitate, restore, and promote the tangible and intangible heritage handed down by the slave trade for the purpose of acquiring this development. The concept gave birth to the UNESCO Slave Route Project. The major inspiration behind this project has been the French historian Jean-Michel Devaux. He commented that the transatlantic slave trade was the greatest human tragedy in human history because of the extent and the time it lasted. A tragedy which violently uprooted tens of millions of Africans from their homeland to be transplanted in the Americas and the West Indies to fuel the economy of the imperialist powers during the 18th century.
Coming to speak to us now is Mr. Leonard Stapleton, who is in fact the person responsible for doing research on the variety of slave sites as far as St. Kitts and Nevis is concerned.
I was summoned by the Slave Route Committee to produce a document that gives the location, the description, and the significance, as well as some historical backgrounds to these places of memories. The approach I took was similar to that of the global Slave Route Project, where you use geography to reveal history. And so I proceeded to look at each parish, starting at St. George and going westward. And I did the same thing for Nevis. And lo and behold, by the time I was finished, I had over 40-something sites that were of significance. And what I used actually to guide me were some general themes. And the themes include the way the enslaved Africans adapted and survived in this new part of the world, and the human rights, the deprivation in some cases, well, in most cases, of the human rights of the enslaved Africans, and also the fight to regain the rights of the enslaved Africans. I think it is a fight that is still continuing. Also, on a brighter note, the contributions and the productivity of these people. The resistance and the revolt, of course, most people who reflect on slavery and that era, they actually focus more on the resistance and the revolt. But coming out of this project, once they read it and absorb it carefully, should be able to recognize that these were a set of persons who contributed a lot under difficult circumstances. And so it was very revealing experience for me, and the number of things I learned about the two islands of St. Kitts and Nevis is amazing. It caused me to bring back those history books I use and recognize that a lot of the material that was used to produce those books actually originated from St. Kitts and Nevis. As a matter of fact, as early as 1898, you had what was called the Melioration Act passed here in St. Kitts, and adaptations of that and amendments to it went through the Caribbean, but it started here. There was also an act passed in Nevis. And so the whole struggle of the Africans actually started in St. Kitts and Nevis. So, and there are different aspects that came out that really made me proud to be a descendant of those persons and a citizen of St. Kitts and Nevis. What I will do, I would give you a sample of some of the places of memories that I came across. Starting in St. Kitts, the parish of St. George, there's an area known as Shitten Bay. And it is supposed that this was a site that the ships coming from Africa would anchor before they reached Sebastopol to get the cargo, which the enslaved Africans were considered to be cargo and products. And they would clean them up and wash them off. And some say the name Shitten Bay actually came from this refuge that was washed off of the enslaved Africans. The Bastia Courthouse is also something. You had the courthouse was the one that was responsible for the human rights in terms of actually dictating, of course with the support of the local militia, how much human rights the enslaved Africans had. And so you saw the slave code, which was something the planters in this side of the wall came up with to control the vast numbers of enslaved Africans. And then you had the Melioration Act, followed by the abolition of slavery and the emancipation, well, the abolition of the slave trade. And lo and behold, you had persons who actually started this thing living here. In the persons of James Ramsey, who spent a number of years here. And he was the one who brought people like William Wilberforce, who you would have read about as the famous Clapham sect, and Buxton and those other persons. You had a genius of a lawyer who lived here also by the name of Lawyer James Stevens. And he was instrumental in finding a back door, the way those lawyers do it. Instead of coming straight up and say, I want to abolish the slave trade, he found a back door. He was a maritime lawyer, and he found a way to convince the Privy Council that Britain was not making anything by having the slave trade continuing. And there were cases that occurred on different estates on both islands that actually made it to the Privy Council and actually caused the entire slave trade to be abolished and eventually led to emancipation. Started here in St. Kitts and also in Nevis. Trinity, we have Challengers Village. After the emancipation, the enslaved Africans were not really free. They were still without that basic human right of owning property. And so you had a gentleman by the name of John Challenger who thought it fit to sell some land to the newly freed Africans to actually make them truly free. And this is still a struggle that is going on even to this day.
Because our young people have cultural talent, and I think it is most appropriate that we now call on a distinguished young gentleman, Mr. Charles Miller, to show us the skills and the talent which our young people in St. Kitts and Nevis possess and can display not just to us, but to others as well. So please welcome Mr. Charles Miller, who is going to do a cultural performance.
Old pirates, yes, they rob by, sold light to the merchant ships. Minutes after they took I from the bottomless pit. But my hand was made strong by the hands of the Almighty. We forward in this generation triumphantly. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I ever had, redemption songs, redemption songs. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it. We got to fulfill the book. So won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I ever had.
We have another young man from the Department of Youth Affairs, Mr. Pierre Liber, who has the honor and the privilege to introduce our guest speaker. Mr. Liber.
It is my distinct pleasure to invite to the podium to deliver the feature address for this evening a distinguished and knowledgeable individual who serves as the caretaker of our treasured historical archives, Mrs. Victoria Oflaherty. A graduate of the University of Malta with a bachelor's degree in history with honors, Mrs. Oflaherty went on to complete her master's in literature in archives and records management at the University of Dundee in Scotland. Mrs. Oflaherty served as a library assistant at the University of Malta and at the University of Kent in England for a total of 5 years. Taught for 14 years between the St. Theresa's Convent and George Moody Schools, and presently holds the post of Director of the Archives at the Federal Government of St. Kitts and Nevis, a position that she has held for the past 15 years. This individual has also served on numerous local and regional advisory committees, including those of the National Museum, the Department of Education's Curriculum Change, the Federation of the West Indies Archives, and currently serves on both the National Commission of UNESCO and the Advisory Committee for a National Policy on Culture. Mrs. Oflaherty also served as an executive member of the Caribbean branch of the International Congress on Archives, CABRICA, for 2002 through 2005. Mrs. Oflaherty has worked with the legal draftsmen in drafting new legislation on archives and records management for the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, and has written other records management policies for the government ministries and departments. In 2009, Mrs. Oflaherty served as Regional Director of efforts that were successful in ensuring the inclusion of the slave registers of the British Caribbean into the UNESCO Memory of the World listing. She has also served as consultant on the history of St. Kitts and Nevis for a number of media organizations, including the UK-based British Broadcasting Corporation, BBC, and independent television, ITV. Over the years, Mrs. Oflaherty has also made numerous presentations covering varied aspects of Kittitian culture and heritage, not only in St. Kitts, but as far abroad as the United Kingdom, Malta, and Austria. An ardent keeper of our national archives, Mrs. Oflaherty continues to research and pursue new avenues to share our rich history and cultural heritage. Her research interests include Kittitian labor history and resistance to enslavement. In addition to her consulting and other initiatives, Mrs. Oflaherty's wealth of knowledge and commitment to sharing it is further evident in her numerous publications in magazines, books, and the World Wide Web. Her most recent initiative includes the development of historicbastia.com, an online source of historic information surrounding our nation's capital. I would like to join Mrs. Oflaherty in encouraging all of us to make use of this interactive tool and stay tuned for official information on the launch of more online activities or more online initiatives that are currently under development. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce to you an individual with an extensive knowledge and passion for Kittitian history and culture and heritage, a trusted caretaker and distributor of the same, our featured speaker for the evening, Mrs. Victoria Oflaherty.
My focus this afternoon is resistance to enslavement. Not a new topic, but what I'm going to try and do is relate it to St. Kitts. Take examples of what was going on in Kittitian history so that we can see that this was actually going on here as well. Up until recently, the end of enslavement was attributed to the abolitionist movement in England. And the enslaved were seen as the major beneficiaries, but with little or no actual input into the process. By revisiting the documents and the publications of the period, historians have discovered a different history, a different story. The general consensus now is that resistance to enslavement in some form or the other was endemic throughout the period of enslavement. And it expressed itself in various ways, shapes and forms, some of which are even difficult to imagine as actual resistance. But we'll go through them and we'll see how these contributed towards the destruction of the slave system that was in force throughout the Caribbean. I would like to start by quoting James Ramsey, who everybody has mentioned already. He lived in St. Kitts for a number of years, and he wrote a very important